And so one of the messages that I'm sure many of us have heard over and over again is this phrase, savor every moment, or like, enjoy this time, like while it lasts, like language like that, and handle it. Like, stop drowning me in all this positive messaging that's making me feel like something's wrong with me for having a hard day where I've had no sleep. Breastfeeding's been really, really, really hard, and I'm sore and tired, and I just wish someone would see me and, like, acknowledge that for me.
And it's a ticket talking Mazda for the figures. That's a comma and a comma and a comma. Gotta get it.
And it's a ticket talking Mazda for the figures. That's a comma.
Carrie, nice to see you again.
Hi, Saríce. It's nice to see you.
I'm so excited to talk to you. You're my first artist that I'm chatting with on the podcast, and I can't wait for you to tell your story to the moms out there. So, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name's Carrie Brummer. I'm an artist and art educator. I have been teaching art for so many years. I've lost count, over 20, and I've been an artist since I was a child, if I'm being honest. And art has recently taken a turn into looking at and talking about the experience of motherhood, which is why I'm here to talk today.
Yeah, well, I love that story. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. What you said, you've been painting since you were a child?
Yeah, my mom was an art major herself. She never ended up having a career. She kind of went straight into family and took on a very traditional, like, stay-at-home mom role. But she always was exploring materials, and I just felt very encouraged in my family to, like, to be fostered in my creativity. Not necessarily to have it for a job, but definitely that it was worth my time, and to be curious about materials and playing and making art was something valuable to do with your time.
Wow, I love that. And really, I like how you put that, something valuable to do it with your time, because I feel like when I was younger, I used to like, I think a lot of children in general, whether we're like especially talented or not, we like to paint and draw. And sometimes, at least I felt that sometimes I was discouraged by society. Like, that's not like you should be spending more time doing math,
Yeah, totally.
science and things like that, things that matter and things that'll get you a
Right.
real job. So that's really cool that you grew up in an encouraging environment.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that way, and it became this opportunity really as a child. I'm a perfectionist. I call myself a recovering perfectionist when I talk about it in terms of teaching and learning. Um, but I can remember it was a way to, like, impress my father. Like, if I could see that he was actually impressed with an artwork I made, I was like, I'm getting somewhere. And that became kind of the bar for me to develop my skill and challenge myself with ideas. And I felt like I had won an award or something if I could get him to react. And that became kind of I don't know, not a very conscious thing. I see it as an adult looking back,
Yeah.
but I absolutely know that was kind of part of my drive and interest, is seeing how much he appreciated my interest and was supportive of it.
Oh, that's nice. And look at you. You're an artist today. It's
Yeah,
possible, people.
it is possible. This is true.
So tell us a little bit about that, because I feel like when people hear like artists, they kind of think of like, how do people make a business doing that? How do people make money doing that? You have like the stigma of like the starving artist that can deter people from even pursuing a career in art. So what gave you like the courage, or how did your business develop?
Great question. I was concerned about stability. Even in my 20s when I was looking at the career, like, I did have that feedback from my family, like, you need something stable and secure. And I had always been drawn to teaching. So for me, that was kind of my way to have freedom with my artistic expression and also have a steady paycheck. Also knowing that I might have summers off or holidays where I could focus exclusively on my work, especially as a single woman at the time. And so it was like, okay, that's going to be some level of security that then affords me permission to play and really push the limits of my work rather than worrying about marketing my art in a very specific way. So I consciously was like, I'm going to focus on teaching for my income. And then I was very interested in, like, public display exhibitions. So when work is selected for something like a public exhibition in like a city space, for example, that's how some of my work was exhibited in Ottawa in Canada. Then it's not necessarily about the sales. It's about like you want to eventually be in a museum maybe one day. And of course, money comes into all of that, but then you're not driven solely by the market or what people around you or that you've been exposed to are interested in or their price points, things like that. So for me, that was kind of my safety net and approach. I know a lot of artists who have multiple income streams. So, but I also know several artists who exclusively just sell their original work now, especially with the power of the internet. They don't need a gallery or a museum to validate their work to
Yeah.
find collectors, right? So I have an email list. People who invest in my online programs for learning how to draw and paint often become my collectors. And that's how I've kind of melded the two is it's about sharing the process and the journey of creating a series of artworks and letting people in behind the scenes. And then I release the work as a whole, and people on my email list get a preview and an early option to invest in any of the works. And so I've got my online courses, and then I have the original work that I release like that periodically.
Wow, I love it. So you also have multiple streams of income. And I like how you went into it. You were kind of like realistic, like, look, I want something stable. So you want the teaching route, but it's also a good profession, not only because like you have a stable income and you can teach doing what you love, but because of those teachers like vacations and holidays and things like that. So that worked out perfectly.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful it suited me. I loved teaching. I loved being in the classroom. I worked with teenagers, which I had so many people be like, "Are you crazy? Why would you choose that age?" I loved working with teenagers. And I ended up moving overseas. So I'm American. I lived in the States. I was teaching on Cape Cod in Massachusetts at the time. And I happened to have a curriculum that we were teaching that's called International Baccalaureate, IB. And I was already trained in it. And most of my colleagues were like twice my age and were like, it took us years to get IB trained. Go, fly, like explore the world. And so I I listened and I got a teaching job in Dubai. And I was teaching at an American school for 6 years there while I was building my portfolio and my voice and trying to figure out what I wanted to say with my work. And then I met my now husband there and we started moving for his job. And it became this opportunity to say, well, I've always wanted to teach online. It was over a decade ago now. So people were just starting to blog and earn money from showing up with like ebooks and some online classes were started. And I thought, maybe I can do this. I want to reach more people. And I had so many grown-ups in parent-teacher conferences share these stories of feeling disconnected from their creativity, having had an interest in the arts, but it being dismissed, and they listened to those critics rather than kind of pursuing it anyways. And I was like, there are a lot of adults out there who could use my help. And that's how I transitioned to online learning, which I've been doing for the past 10 years or so.
Love it. That is, I can relate to that too, because that's something that for my, I think this was during COVID. Yeah. So for one of my birthdays, my mom actually bought me an easel with paint because she remembered like that I used to like to paint when I was little and I kind of neglected it. So yeah, I think like I would be somebody who would be interested in a course like that because I feel like when you haven't been losing that part of your creativity for decades, I felt it was, like, daunting. I, like, got to the canvas and the paint, and I was afraid to ruin the paper. And
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, I felt so it was, like, so sad. I'm like, "I didn't even know how to start." And so I was, like, starting with, like, YouTube and everything. So I love that idea, that concept.
Thank you. And it really has been a segue into me finding and really owning my own voice as an artist. That journey, the curriculum that I taught and working with people forced me to reflect on my own practice and take it to different levels. And I think that really challenged me. So I kind of felt like my own work was cliche, and a word used in the art world is derivative, which means that it's heavily influenced by another artist and it's almost more their style than yours. And I just kept kind of having some self judgment around that, which is true for all artists, no matter your level,
Yeah, I
I
can
think.
imagine. I think that's true
Um,
for yeah, not just
yeah, for
artists.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was second guessing those things and I just decided to trust the journey. And so I was making work that was elevating women, women from history that we probably all knew on some level. And I was looking for royalty-free images. A lot of people don't realize you can't just like draw or paint from any photograph. There's copyright issues involved with that.
Even
And
with
so,
repainting a photo.
yes.
Okay.
If it's too similar to the original, that can actually,
Mm.
and you're trying to sell or promote the work, it can lead
Oh,
to legal
legal.
action.
Right.
So you have to be really careful about that stuff. So I was searching on the US National Archives trying to find images, I think of either Rosa Parks or Amelia Earhart, but those were two women I was painting at the time. And I stumbled on these images of these women from the 1940s training to be cabbies in the US while all the men were at war. And they were smiling and lit up, and they were cabbies, and some were photographers. And then I noticed not a single one had their name documented. Not a single name was recorded. So they were worthy of being documented for historical like merit. And that became the new body of work. And that started to be this connecting thread of like, I like these stories about women, about like ignored or under, or I guess, overlooked kind of circumstances of women's lives. And that was driving a lot of my work until I became pregnant and had a baby in March of 2020.
Yes, and I love the story of what inspired your work that you do now. So if you can tell us a little about that and that process.
Sure. So I found out I was pregnant in Canada. My husband's Canadian, I'm American. And we were moving from Ottawa, Canada to Houston, Texas. And no one knew at the time. We were waiting until we had a doctor check, everything checked out. We get settled in Texas. We find out we're due in actually on leap year of February of 2020. But, babies all have their own timeline, as we all know. And I had emergency C-section. We're all settled at home. We had told our family, who all live far from us, we didn't want my parents flying in from Canada, his parents, because we wanted a little time together first with our child. And my mom was a 2-day drive away. Again, same for her. Like, you guys can stagger your visits. It'll be great. And then none of them met her until she was 8 months because, as we all know, lockdowns happened. People
Right.
couldn't necessarily come into the country. Canada kind of locked things down a bit. And we didn't even know what was going on until my I had a prenatal yoga teacher who came by with like a casserole. And I remember her like not touching any surface and like trying to use her elbows and talking about like toilet paper outages. And we were like, what's going on? Because like when you have your infant, like in the first week, you are not
Just
checking the news, you are
right.
sleeping and trying to cope. So then we find out there's this pandemic, and we're like, oh, I guess it's just us.
Mhm.
And it was wonderful and so hard all at the same time. And so during that time, I started to wonder, well, how am I going to make art? I was lucky in that my spouse, he only had 2 weeks of paid leave. But what happened was everyone had to start working from home.
Mm.
And so that became a blessing for us with no one else being able to be around or help because, at least we had each other while we were raising our little human. But I got so burnt out and so tired, and I started thinking about, like, what materials could I use? Because getting out paint was becoming impossible. Like, I had no idea how long she was napping, and I felt like I was losing myself a bit, and I wanted to reconnect, and for me, art was a way to kind of reconnect with the person I was before child, because there is this transition, of course, as we move into motherhood,
Mm.
and I drew myself as a marionette in colored pencil. I used to work in colored pencil. It was so easy to pick up and put down. And I used a self-portrait of myself smiling, holding my child. And I used the face from that of me smiling when my daughter was 7 months old. And I just called it Self-Portrait at 7 months. And I shared it on my social media. And I had a slew of parents like reach out privately being like, it's not just the pandemic, Carrie. We have all felt this way. And that's when I really felt like this was a new chapter for my work. And that was a moment where I started to get curious about how could we talk more about this as caregivers, and how can we feel more permission to share the good and bad parts because we have such a culture of perfectionism that if we share that something's been hard, it's almost like people take it to mean, or we're worried people will assume that means we're a bad parent or that we're not happy to be a parent, when that
Right.
could be the furthest thing from the truth. And yet that lack of permission can be so stifling. And that spearheaded this kind of new direction for my art.
Wow, you said so many things that I resonate with. The fact, like how you said you were kind of losing yourself and trying to look for something to reconnect with your old self, and I feel like that's something that a lot of moms go through. Like I feel like maybe our husbands don't or our partners or whoever, they don't experience it that much. And we literally like our identity changes in a way. And you go through this like grieving process where you're grieving like who you used to be. And you kind of want to cling on to something that reminds you of what you used to be. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, right? We don't It's all about the baby. And of course, it's important and joyful and wonderful to think about our newborn child and our children. That is a priority. That's why we're having this conversation. Children are important to us, right? However, how can we really give our all to our family if we aren't cared for ourselves and don't feel permission to communicate like the nuanced experience of being a caregiver? So kind of tied to that, like besides the pencil drawings and me looking at that, I also love embroidery, and that's another easy medium to like pick up and put down as you're parenting. At one point, it was kind of tied to around when I had drawn myself as a marionette. Someone said it, and I was thinking to myself, though I didn't say it out loud, if one more person says that to me, I'm going to punch them in the nose through this,
Yeah.
through my phone. I just like, I can't, I would feel so much better. So I'd been collecting over the years all the cloth diapers. I chose to cloth diaper my daughter during at least day. And so I kept all the used pre-fold cloth diapers and I was like, I'm going to embroider into these. And that's when it hit me that I would start embroidering those phrases over and over again on these diapers. And I'm surrounding them with like pretty flowers, the way that we might get a beautiful embroidery from like an auntie or a friend when our child is born and it's beautifully framed. That's the plan, is I want to have a whole wall filled with these pre-cloth diapers embroidered in a beautiful way and framed beautifully. But when you get closer, you start to see that they're actually on a used cloth diaper. And it gets you thinking about this conversation of it's not all sunshine and roses or whatever the phrase is, that there is this other um, element. Like parenthood is complicated and that
Yes.
should be okay.
And I feel like parents, well, most parents understand that. I feel like the ones on social media are just pretending. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, right? I'm like, you just but yeah, it's like only a mom knows how complicated that feeling is, where you love your child so much, but at the same time you're like so exhausted, and you're like you can feel like, I don't know, resentment towards your partner, and you feel alone. And especially like I'm also in your situation, like we don't have any help, and that's another added layer. Like I know people
Yes.
who like have a hard time. They live next to their like parents and they have a bunch of help. So even more so when you don't have that like break that you can take in the middle of the day. So yeah, that's
Yes.
something that it's real, and I like that we're having this conversation, and I'm sure that moms, real ones, will relate to this and not say, "Oh, well, you should be savor the moment." When you say that, I just think about like certain comments I've gotten as well. So probably every mom has gotten.
Yeah, I think so. And I really want people to be in conversation about this. So like another element which we talked about before too is I was like, how can I bring other people into this conversation?
Right.
So I kind of have one project that's coming up that I'm hoping to put together. And then the other piece is I created a dedicated Instagram account to invite caregivers to answer a simple phrase anonymously. There's a form. You can answer it anonymously. If you want to stay up to date, then you can give an email, but you do not have to. And the sentence or phrase that I ask you to finish is I am a primary caregiver, semicolon, I dot dot dot. And so people answer that anonymously, and then I post as many as I can on Instagram every week. And that's been really like affirming and challenging. Like some of them, when I've received responses, have brought me to tears as soon as I see them because I connect so deeply with what someone's been sharing. And I think the anonymity is important as an option for when I share it so that people can really say what they want. Someone actually, one of the ones that really hit me was I'm a primary caregiver, excuse me. I sometimes resent my partner for the care, right? For the care responsibility I feel I have over theirs, and how many people feel or think those things, just like I was like, if someone else tells me savor every moment, I'm gonna be
Yeah.
violent. But we don't feel permission to say it out loud. And maybe we do in a small circle of friends, but maybe not even there. And I feel like when we talk about cultural issues with like mental health of parents and children being an issue and seems to be escalating as a problem, I feel like part of it is because of these unspoken pressures to not talk about these hard parts.
Yes, definitely. Well, and I saw this form and I need to finish filling it out, and I'll make sure it's linked also in the show notes because I
Thank
think this
you.
is such a beautiful project, and I hope a lot of people participate. And you said there's also an option to donate cloth diapers, right?
Yes, please. So I brought like one of mine here. I don't know how well people can see it for those of you watching on video, but like here's one of them.
Oh, I
So this
love
is
it.
just a pre-fold. Like you can see it's like worn out and stuff. I don't care if there's stains on it as long as it's clean, but yeah, if you guys could email me at my email, which we can make sure is linked
Yeah,
to, it's
I'll make sure everything's
yeah.
in the show notes.
Thank you. I would love some donations of used cloth diapers because I would rather use used ones than buy brand new ones. I think that is part of the inherent
Yeah,
meaning in the work.
exactly.
Uh,
And speaking of, talked about like, partners and everything. Is your partner, what does he feel about your artistic career? Does he give you inspiration, ideas? How is that dynamic?
He has been so supportive. I almost feel like emotional thinking about it. So, I had a solo exhibition of that group of works that I talked about before transitioning into the conversation about motherhood, about these women who were training to be cabbies and photographers in the 40s. And that I titled that series Anonymous Woman. I got a solo show in Canada for it, and then we found out we were moving. So we decided I'd still commit to the show. We just have to bring the artwork that I like stored all the artwork I had already finished in Canada with a friend. All the artwork that wasn't finished, I'd have to figure out how to fly it with me from Texas back to Canada. But then we found out because of the due date of my pregnancy, I wouldn't be able to fly by myself to go collect and close up the show. I wouldn't be allowed to fly for that time. So he went by himself and shut down my whole art exhibition.
Wow. Oh my God.
Like, so for me, like that, like, there's no, like, action speaks so much louder than words. And that was
Exactly.
like, so, like, even now, like, sometimes I forget how grateful I am to have a partner who, like, understands this is important to me, and like something we've tried to do, I'd heard friends do years ago is they said, like they each get 2 nights a week where they get to go out and do something for themselves. So it might be like going to yoga or going to like a game night with friends, but they kind of divided up their weeknights to make sure that they both had time alone with the kids and they also got some me time. So we were like, let's do that too. We do like one night a week. And for us, it's become like he gets Thursday night, I get Saturday mornings. And I either work on my art ed business or I make art. And even at night, like at bedtime, we kind of take turns doing bedtime stuff. So when he's putting her to bed, I'm drawing. Like he can tell even before child, if I wasn't making a lot of art, there'd be moments where he'd be like, maybe you should go to the studio, like he could tell when it's been a
Wow.
while because it is so fueling. And I think for a lot of creatives, it's not just a hobby, it's like part of who you are. It is really identity based. So that was also this challenge of like moving into motherhood and figuring out like how am I going to balance all these things because this is important to me and I want to keep this part of myself and I want to be an example to my daughter that I stick to things that I do value and care about. And how do I make time for that moving forward without um I don't know, like ignoring my family or not giving them the time and presence that I really wanna give them as well.
Yeah, and I really love the teamwork, the cooperation between you 2. Me and my husband also have a similar arrangement where I have, like, Friday mornings is my my time where I'm either working on my business or I go meet a friend for coffee or whatever, and yeah, and he'll usually have, like, Saturday, he likes to paraglide, so he'll go paragliding
Oh,
and
nice.
but it's really that can make the whole difference when you have someone who gets it, who's supportive and for me it's not a given because he comes from a different culture where the fathers aren't necessarily that involved and the fact that he's like, understanding and yeah, so yeah, it makes all the difference when you have that.
Absolutely, and in that way, right, I didn't feel entirely alone during the pandemic, because I knew he was around, and he
Yeah.
was showing up and helping, and for that, I will always be grateful that we've been in conversation and can continue to evolve and figure that out as she grows up, she's 4 now for us, so, the kind of responsibility is starting to shift, and her independence is starting to come through way more, and trying to figure out, like, what all that should look like and what activities should be, like, all of us going to support her versus one parent taking her so someone can have a break to read or have some
Yeah.
coffee or do something. And that's been really important to me. And I yeah, I just can't I'm so lucky that I've kind of like had that partnership. And I do think that's a privilege because not everyone, there are people who are doing this on their own, and bless you for those of you who are, because this is hard
Right.
work.
It is. I can
And
imagine.
yeah,
It's a good point when I'm saying we don't have any help, but at least it's two of us. And there are
yeah.
single moms out there where I have so much like respect for them because I'm like, I don't know how I would do it alone.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, can we just have these conversations and feel heard and seen instead of being held to standards that I also feel like, especially like with like mommy blogs and just the curation of social media, like on Instagram, as you were saying, like people put out the best of the best and make it idyllic and look at the perfect life we have. And of course it's not perfect. Um, but I feel like that's almost um, I don't know, like making that perfectionism worse for all of us, that we don't feel like we can speak up when it's hard or ask for help from friends or family or say that we need help at all because somehow that's like a slight on
Yeah.
ourselves, And it's really driving my desire to keep this conversation going with the art. So, I mean, in terms of the embroideries, the other piece that I'm hoping to do, I have not yet done, is I want to host online and in-person workshops where we get small groups of women together and I teach them how to embroider so they can embroider their own phrase onto a remnant from their caregiving. So it could be like a little onesie or a hat or whatever it is, right? But something that's meaningful to them and their parenting experience, to kind of reclaim and be in a community, a small group of people who are all there because they want to acknowledge this duality of the joy and difficulty of raising a small child, and really at any age. But that's kind of where my experience comes from.
I love it. Definitely sign up.
I'm so glad
So,
to hear that. Thanks, Saríce.
and you mentioned about your daughter, like you had an example from your mom. Your mom like was an artist and you had that support from her. And I love that you're doing this and you mentioned that like you want your daughter to see you as a that you're not like giving up your whole self to motherhood because I do believe that that's something like of course we're moms, but I think it's important for our children to see us as more than caregivers and
Yeah.
her to see that mommy's an artist and mommy has a business and she went for her passion and she's doing what she loves and I think that's such a great example for her.
Thank you. It's something that's been very important to me. I chose to be child-free for many years. My partner and I were not sure we wanted kids for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then kind of my biological clock in the window was getting narrower and narrow. And we're like, okay, let's go for one. Let's see kind of what happens there. And we were fortunate that she showed up. But so I had this strong sense of identity. And again, being a recovering perfectionist, it was also about like performance and success and career and life. And so it was so threatening to be like, that's all gone now. I'm going to stay at home and be a mom, which is of course a whole another different kind of hard work. But
Yeah.
like in my head, losing that professional designation, I was an assistant principal for a year before I kind of transitioned back to teaching art. Um, and all those things were kind of, well, in my head mixing around. So like all of that was important to me to think about, is like, how do I balance those things and show her that it's okay to have a passion and something to care about? So when I think about my daughter and wanting to show her that something's important to me, it's been really nice to invite her into it. And that's kind of been part of how I've been doing it. So my studio, which is our dining room that I just took over, it became a shared studio, and she refers to it as her studio. So
Oh.
like we can make art in there together, and she's got a space to make marks and play and explore with material. And she's reaching an age now where it doesn't have to be us doing the same thing all the time. So like I can pull out some collage, for example, and maybe work in one of my sketchbooks while she's collaging. And so there's just been this like shared time together while I'm also getting to do something that's important to me. And it's led her to saying, which I don't ever ask her like what she wants to be when she grows up or anything. I don't really want to push that kind of achievement, knowing my own nature. Like I don't want to push that on her. But so like at school they asked her that question and they'd written it on a little paper. She's like, I'm going to be an artist and an engineer because her daddy's an engineer. And I was like, okay, I didn't even know you were thinking about this. But like I guess, something's rubbing off here, and we are understanding the like mom is mom and has this other thing she cares about. And I really do hope that makes her feel permission to be both. I think there's been a lot of pressure for kind of our generation too, that we were supposed to be like super successful business women and super
That
successful
part.
moms. Yeah, and somehow magically do both, without, like, reneging on any of the responsibility of either.
Yes, that's something that's so I feel like we have mom guilt no matter what. Because like I feel like, with the feminist movement and everything, it was like, no, you need to like go back to work and like, leave the kids and put them in daycare right away. And I'm just like, whoever, if you want to do that, that's like more power to you. That's great. That's awesome. But sometimes I feel like, I get that, oh, you're at home, you're still at home. This is what some people told me because my son is
Mm.
2 now. And I'm like, yeah, yes, why don't you put him in daycare? I don't know, like, why people feel like why they should even ask that question. Like, why do you care? And then
Yeah.
the opposite, like, I don't know, I feel like they think that if you're a mom at home, it's like kind of like you're like a setback for like a women's movement.
Yes, yes,
And
totally.
then the opposite, like and then there's some women that are, especially like kind of more old school in thought where they're like, you should be at home with your kids. You're letting like strangers raise your kids. I'm like, let's just, slow it down and let everybody
Yes.
do what's best for them because I'm like, I
Mhm.
think if we're good, if moms take care of themselves, then we'll have the capacity to like, take care of to take care of our families. But we need to make ourselves the priority because a lot of times we're like the backbone that makes everything in the house move along. So we need to
Yeah,
start prioritizing ourselves more. And I'm
and
like,
feeling
don't
that
feel guilt.
permission.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
permission. Like we always have this, yeah, this guilt, this judgment. Like, oh, you're at home with the kids. Oh, you give your kids to strangers every day. Yeah, that's something
Mhm.
that I'm so ready for this to like stop being a
Yeah.
a thing.
I'm really curious if what we've been talking about is part of the problem, right? When you have this perfectionist either or mindset, it's one or the other. And then also when we're not all engaging in these conversations more publicly, then I think sometimes that's a reflection of people's own insecurities of whether they made the right choice for them because they did what they thought they were supposed to do or what people
Yeah.
said for them to do, rather than feeling confident to look within themselves and go, I know I should go back to work. Like my sister, she knew she wanted to go back to work right away. Like she was like, "I'm alphabetizing my spice racks. I gotta get back to work. Like I'm
Yeah.
done." Like she did not want to stay home, and that worked for her family. She's got two beautiful kids. She's 16 years older than I am. Her kids are now adults. But I got to see that, and then I got to see my mom stay at home, and also like on her end, like she shared stories of, like working women completely dismissing her because she was a stay-at-home mom. So like there's so much judgment every way around. And I just think if we all feel permission to really own our path and we do it because it's right for us and our family, and it comes from a place of like being values driven rather than kind of a top-down communication
Mm.
from somewhere else, that maybe we'd be a little less judging of others because we'd be more confident in our
Yeah, I
own
think
skin.
you hit it, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's it because that's why like I don't feel the need to judge a person either way. I'm okay with my decision. I chose this. I actually thought I was gonna be the type of that would go straight to work and then I had my son and then it was like COVID was just over and I'm like, no, I actually want to stay home with him. And I'm like sound in that decision, for now. But yeah, I guess people who aren't, they feel maybe pressured in their decision or maybe like feel the judgment and that makes them like judge other people because they're insecure. I think you
Mhm.
put, I think you got it. It's definitely that.
Yeah, and social media and, like, media headlines being so clickbaity, I feel like all
Yeah,
of that just reinforces this quick to judge others rather than being empathetic and thinking about, how that decision might be in the best interest of them and their children. Because as you say, like, happy mom, like, if you're happier and more fulfilled, that's gonna show through in how you're present as a parent,
right.
instead of sacrificing everything and feeling silently resentful because we aren't doing things that are truly in alignment.
And
And
children,
I
as they get
yeah,
older, they'll sense that. They'll sense that mom is not
absolutely.
happy. So that's important. Sorry, I cut you
Yeah.
off.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's it, right? Like that's why this work is now so important to me, is having this awareness. And um, because I chose to be child-free for so long, there were times where I was the judgmental single child-free person judging parents as well. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's also kind of like an issue, is like this whole lack of village that we talked about, us feeling like we don't have a village to raise, but I also feel like collectively it's such an individualistic problem now. Like, oh, you chose to have a kid, it's your problem. Instead of this kind of like children need to learn in community and they're not going to figure things out if we don't take them to restaurants, if they don't fly on planes, if they don't, show up in public. It's like they're supposed to be hidden now until they're adults or
Yeah,
something.
can you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, so I don't know, I saw a headline recently where people were talking about something on flights or social media, and I just saw a slew of comments of people being like, "Why did that person bring their kid on the plane?" The judgment of like people will buy seats to have their kids seated next to them for long flights and things, but then if their flight's canceled and reconnected, they don't always get seated together. And then people are judging the parent when that's the policy of the airline. Like there's just so much kind of vitriol placed on families that I kinda knew was happening, and even myself, I would joke like, "Oh," especially having long haul flights from Dubai to DC or Dubai to New York to come back to see family, be like, "Oh, I really hope there aren't a lot of kids on this flight," because they can cry and they can get upset, so I was that person, and then coming into parenthood with that maturity and awareness, choosing to be a parent older, like, and having that nuanced change, it also made humbled me, right? To be like, "Whoa," like, I'm not thinking about like, societal implications for my behavior and how I was thinking about people who chose to be parents and how, we put the problem on them rather than showing how we can collectively make a better world when we're all being supportive of each other's individual choices, including women who choose to be child-free, because that's kind of another place of severe judgment, right?
Yeah. So much judgment. But yeah, I definitely I've seen those posts and it is a bit like, disheartening where people are like, why did they have a baby on the flight? Like because we need to get we need to get to our destination and we have a baby or like the baby shouldn't be in the restaurant. And I saw this whole thing about the lady that was complaining about like children in Costco like and and it makes me like I shouldn't feel I'm get so stressed when I'm about to go in some place and I have my like 2-year-old and I'm like trying to prep him and everything. But I'm like, if we were just more welcoming, and I feel that it's also cultural. Like I feel that a little bit more in the States. And here, like I feel like it's more family oriented. So I'll go in a restaurant or something, and they'll offer, "Do you want a coloring book?" They'll give you crayons and something to like entertain. And I'm like, I like that I don't feel guilty about bringing my my child with me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, it's an added pressure on top of all of this other
Right,
perfect
like we
parenting
need
we
more.
expect. Yeah, now you have to make sure your child is, like, the model citizen when adults can't even be model citizens in
Right.
restaurants or in public spaces, but we'll expect a
Exactly.
toddler to do that, you know?
Right, and without a developed prefrontal cortex. That's what I'm saying, like, sometimes I see adults act, like, worse than toddlers, and then they say, "Oh, why did she bring her kid?" Or
Yeah, yeah, and it's like all of these things are kind of this part that simmers like, as a creative, it's like, how do I start communicating those ideas, right? And that's why, like, I kept holding on to these cloth diapers thinking, "I'm crazy, like, why am I holding on to her used cloth diapers? What am I gonna do with them?" You know? But then something clicks, and it's like, this is the way to start having that conversation. Sometimes life is poo, you know?
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I just feel like if we could lean into those gray areas more and more nuance of this, and maybe more parents speaking up about the nuanced experience, which I am seeing a shift online. I have seen, like, more accounts where parents are trying to show the messiness of parenting and life and not the kind of, again, idyllic, picture perfect version,
Yeah.
which I really appreciate, but I think we need to have more of that, just reinforcing everyone so that you don't feel alone when you're transitioning from into parenthood and figuring out what that means for yourself and how to ask for help and knowing that there's nothing wrong with you for needing help. Like historically, we raised children in communities or, multi-generational families where you had more support, living together. So I just, it comes from a place of real heart for me, like my work. And I think you'd see with a lot of creatives, that's what's happening. And there is a whole kind of movement of artists who are starting to talk more about parenting and motherhood and how to kind of document the experience of it. And that, like, not the black and white version, but this nuanced experience of being a caregiver that I think can be really valuable and a way to help people connect emotionally when maybe we don't always have the words to express what we're going through or explain how we're feeling.
Well, I think it's such a important you have such an important profession, and I love the medium that you chose to express it, and yeah, I'm just happy that art is living on and also getting more popular in the parenting space. Thanks to people like you.
Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to talk about this, Saríce, and thank you because your podcast and places like this are part of how we can start normalizing the reality of parenting and honoring the fullness of our experience so that we really can be our best expressed selves and be the best parents we can be and partners, right? Like, how do we do all those things if we don't have space to honor all of our experience?
And before we end this, I want to ask you, do you have any advice to the moms out there? Is there something that we can do to get in touch with our child artist inside of us? Maybe a little exercise or something that you can suggest that we do?
I think it's great to go back to your childhood and reflect if there was a particular medium or activity you enjoyed. So I know some people who hated coloring books. It was like frustrating to go back and try to stay in the lines. But if you like coloring, like pull out a coloring book. Like it's okay to play with child materials and have them. And there are all kinds of adult coloring books now. If you like to doodle, doodling is a wonderful way to play without feeling the pressure of having to be super realistic in your drawing ability, which is also a kind of unreasonable standard to have if you've been away from your creativity for a while. So, like think of something that feels comfortable and playful. It could be mushing around a bunch of paint on a piece of paper or a canvas you have. There's no wrong way to be creative. The problem is again, like this like self-judgment of standard of like, well, I should be good at art. Well, you can get good at art. It's a skill you can develop, but you need time and space to do that. And maybe right now it's picking up something to do a little embroidery or, like I work in colored pencils now because it's easy to pick up and put down. Like what materials do you already have in your home that would let you do a few minutes of play? And it can be 5 minutes and it can make, if you do 5 minutes a day, it starts to be a touch point for yourself to say, I get to check in with myself and how I feel and just make space, kind of headspace and physical space for something else. And I tell that to my students all the time. And it's amazing how those like 5 or 15 minutes morphs into something much bigger once they develop that habit.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Carrie, tell people where they connect with you and see your work and maybe work with you.
Absolutely. So my art is on my website, carriebrummer.com. And I don't have yet a lot of parenting work up there. You can see the parenting work on my Instagram, which is Carrie Brummer Art. And if you are interested in learning more about art, I tend to work with artists, like self-taught artists who maybe had worked with art in the past, but have like left it behind and are ready to like come back to it again. You can learn more about that through artiststrong.com.
Great. So I'll have everything linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor and you have so many you dropped so many gems today. So thank you for that.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you everyone for listening and I hope you all have a good day.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Maternity Leave. I hope you found value in this episode. Your support means the world. By subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing this episode with another mom entrepreneur, you'll help it grow and reach more incredible guests who can share their insights and guidance. Until next time, take care, love on your loved ones, and make it happen. You got this.
And it's a ticket talking Mazda for the biggest. That's a comma and a comma and a comma. Gotta get it, get it.
And it's a ticket talking Mazda for the biggest. That's a comma and a comma and a comma. Gotta get it.